The rushing water of the San Pedro Creek had turned treacherous after 3 days of unexpected spring storms, and Clarissa Davenport never saw the submerged log that caught her foot as she tried to cross to reach the wild herbs growing on the far bank. One moment she was carefully placing her boot on what she thought was solid ground, and the next she was being swept downstream, her heavy skirts dragging her under like anchors determined to pull her to the bottom. The cold water filled her mouth as she tried to scream, her arms flailing uselessly against the current that seemed intent on claiming her life on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon in April of 1876. She had always been larger than other women, a fact her stepmother never let her forget, and now that very weight that had brought her so much shame was working against her survival. The waterlogged fabric of her dress clung to her body, making it impossible to gain any purchase against the slippery rocks beneath her feet. Her lungs burned as she fought to keep her head above water, but the creek was winning, pulling her down into its murky depths with each passing second. Just as darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, strong hands gripped her upper arms and hauled her upward with a force that seemed almost superhuman. She broke the surface gasping and choking, feeling herself being dragged through the shallower water near the bank. Her rescuer pulled her completely out of the creek and onto the muddy shore, turning her onto her side as she coughed up what felt like half the creek. "Breathe, you're safe now," a deep male voice said above her, firm but somehow gentle at the same time. Clarissa couldn't respond, too busy trying to force air back into her lungs while expelling water. Her whole body shook from cold and shock, and she dimly registered a hand patting her back firmly, helping her clear her airways. When she finally managed to draw a full breath without coughing, she rolled onto her back in the mud, staring up at the brilliant Arizona sky and the face of the man who had saved her life. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 25 to her 23 years, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the water and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His strong jaw was shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes were as soaked as her own, testament to the fact that he had not hesitated to plunge into the dangerous creek to save a complete stranger. "Can you speak?" he asked, studying her face with concern etched into every line of his own. "Yes," she managed, her voice rough and raw. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die." "You nearly did," he said bluntly. "That creek is meaner than a rattlesnake after all this rain. What were you doing trying to cross it?" Clarissa struggled to sit up, and he helped her, one hand steady against her back. She was acutely aware of how she must look, covered in mud, her hair hanging in wet tangles around her face, her dress clinging to every unfashionable curve of her body. She had never been the delicate type of woman that men wrote poetry about, and sitting here next to this handsome stranger only emphasized that fact. "I was gathering herbs," she said, gesturing weakly toward the basket that had washed up several yards downstream, its contents scattered among the rocks. "I thought I could make it across." The water looked shallower than it was. "Lucky I was riding past," he said, glancing back toward where a paint horse stood ground-tied, watching them with intelligent eyes. "Name's Dalton Zimmerman. I work the Double Bar Ranch about 5 miles south of Florence." "Clarissa Davenport," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself as another shiver ran through her body. "I live in town with my father and stepmother. We run the general store." "Davenport's General Store," Dalton said, recognition lighting his features. "I've been there a few times. Never saw you, though." "I'm usually in the back, doing inventory or keeping the books," Clarissa said, which was partly true. The whole truth was that her stepmother, Virginia, preferred to keep her hidden away, embarrassed by her size and convinced that Clarissa's presence would drive away customers rather than attract them. Dalton stood and offered her his hand. "We need to get you somewhere warm before you catch your death. Can you ride?" "I can manage," Clarissa said, though her legs felt like water as she allowed him to pull her to her feet, The world spun slightly, and she swayed, feeling his hands steady her shoulders immediately. "Easy now," he said. "You've had a shock. Just take it slow." They walked together to his horse, Dalton's hand never leaving her elbow, ready to catch her if she stumbled. The paint horse stood calmly as Dalton helped Clarissa mount, then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. She knew she should feel mortified at the intimate position, at the way her wet dress was surely leaving a damp impression against his chest, at how aware she was of his solid presence behind her. But mostly she just felt grateful to be alive and safe. The ride into Florence took about 20 minutes, and Clarissa spent most of it trying not to think about how natural it felt to lean back against Dalton's chest, how his warmth was slowly driving away the chill that had settled into her bones. He kept the horse at a steady walk, not jarring her more than necessary, and asked her gentle questions about her herb gathering to keep her talking and alert. "Mostly medicinal plants," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "Yarrow for wounds, sage for tea, wild onions for cooking. There's a woman on the edge of town, Mrs. Chun, who taught me which plants are safe and how to use them. She came from California years ago with her husband who worked on the railroad." "That's good knowledge to have out here," Dalton said, and she could hear genuine respect in his voice. "We could use someone with healing skills. The nearest doctor is in Tucson, and that's a hard day's ride when someone's been snake-bit or taken with fever." "Do you have much trouble with that at the ranch?" Clarissa asked, partly curious and partly desperate to keep the conversation going, to maintain the strange connection she felt forming between them. "Enough," Dalton admitted. "We're a good-sized operation. The boss, Mr. Henderson, runs about 500 head of cattle with a crew of 15 men. Someone's always getting kicked by a horse or cut on barbed wire or coming down with something. The boss's wife does what she can, but she's got her hands full with their 4 children. They entered Florence proper, passing the scattering of adobe buildings and wooden structures that made up the town. Florence had been established as a mining town in the 1860s, but by 1876 it had evolved into a ranching community, serving the surrounding homesteads and cattle operations. The main street was quiet in the afternoon heat, most people wisely staying indoors during the hottest part of the day. Dalton guided the horse to the general store, a sturdy wooden building with a covered porch and large front windows displaying everything from farming equipment to bolts of fabric. Clarissa's heart sank as she saw her stepmother through the window, serving a customer with her practiced smile. Virginia was going to be furious about the state of Clarissa's dress, about the spectacle of arriving in town on horseback with a strange man, about everything. "This is your stop," Dalton said, bringing the horse to a halt. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Clarissa down, his hands strong around her waist. For just a moment they stood face to face, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Thank you again," Clarissa said quietly. "You saved my life today." "I'm just glad I was there," Dalton replied, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "Will you be all right? That was quite an ordeal." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though she was not at all certain that was true. "I should go in before my stepmother sees me standing out here looking like something the cat dragged in." "You look like someone who survived a dangerous creek," Dalton said firmly. "Nothing to be ashamed of in that." He hesitated, then added, "I come to town most Saturday mornings for supplies. Maybe I'll see you then." "Maybe," Clarissa said, trying not to read too much into the hopeful note in his voice. Men like Dalton, handsome ranch hands with their whole lives ahead of them, did not develop romantic interests in women like her. He was just being kind, making sure she was all right after the rescue. Nothing more. But as she climbed the steps to the store's front door, she could not resist looking back. Dalton was still there, watching to make sure she got inside safely, and when their eyes met, He touched the brim of his wet hat in a small salute before mounting his horse and riding away. The bell above the door chimed as Clarissa entered, and Virginia's head snapped toward the sound. Her stepmother's eyes widened in horror at the sight of her, and she quickly excused herself from the customer, hurrying over with fury radiating from every line of her thin, elegant frame. "What on earth happened to you?" Virginia hissed, keeping her voice low so the customer would not hear. "You look absolutely disgraceful. Get to the back room this instant before anyone else sees you." Clarissa obeyed, too tired to argue, dripping water and mud across the clean floor as she made her way to the storeroom at the back of the building. This was where she spent most of her time, surrounded by crates and barrels, doing the unglamorous work that kept the store running while Virginia handled the customers with her charm and beauty. Her father found her there 10 minutes later as she was wringing water from her hair into a bucket. Thomas Davenport was a quiet man, worn down by grief after Clarissa's mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Clarissa was 12. He had remarried 2 years later, choosing Virginia for her competence and energy, not realizing until too late that she had no warmth to spare for his daughter. "Virginia says you fell in the creek," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "Are you hurt, Clarissa?" "I'm fine, Papa," she assured him, though her muscles were already beginning to ache from fighting the current. "I would not have been, though, if a rancher had not pulled me out. I was drowning." Thomas paled. "My God, you could have died." "I know," Clarissa said softly, "but I did not. A man named Dalton Zimmerman saved me. He works at the Double Bar Ranch. Then I owe him a debt I can never repay," her father said, pulling her into a fierce hug despite her wet clothes. "You're all I have left of your mother, Clarissa. I could not bear to lose you." The moment of tenderness was interrupted by Virginia's sharp voice from the doorway. "Thomas, there are customers. I cannot manage the store alone while you stand here chatting. Clarissa needs to change out of those ruined clothes and get back to work. The new inventory from Tucson needs to be cataloged." Thomas released his daughter with a final squeeze of her shoulders. "Go home and rest," he said. "The inventory can wait until tomorrow." "Thomas," Virginia protested, but he cut her off with a firmness that Clarissa rarely heard from him. "Our daughter nearly died today. She's going to rest. I'll handle the customers with you." Clarissa slipped out the back door before Virginia could argue further, taking the short path to the small house behind the store where they lived. It was a modest adobe structure, kept scrupulously clean by Virginia's exacting standards, with 3 small bedrooms and a kitchen where they took their meals. She changed into dry clothes, hanging her ruined dress to dry even though she suspected it was beyond saving. As she combed the tangles from her hair, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. Her face was flushed from the sun and exertion, her blue eyes bright with residual fear and something else she did not want to name. She had never been pretty in the conventional sense, but her mother had always told her she had kind eyes and a lovely smile. Looking at herself now, all she could see was the roundness of her cheeks, the softness of her jaw, the body that had never fit the ideal of fashionable femininity. What had Dalton seen when he looked at her? A woman in need of rescue, nothing more. It was foolish to imagine anything else, to replay the warmth in his voice or the gentle way he had touched her arm. He had been kind, as any decent person would be, but kindness was not romance. Still, as she lay down on her bed to rest as her father had instructed, Clarissa could not stop thinking about those whiskey-colored eyes or the feeling of safety she had experienced in his arms during the ride back to town. It had been so long since anyone had made her feel protected rather than burdensome, valued rather than shameful. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to drift into an exhausted sleep, dreaming of rushing water and strong hands pulling her toward the light. The next few days passed in their usual routine. Clarissa kept the books, managed inventory, and occasionally helped customers when Virginia was busy, though her stepmother made sure those occasions were rare. She thought about Dalton more than she cared to admit, wondering if he would truly come to the store on Saturday as he had suggested, or if that had been merely a polite thing to say with no real intention behind it. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, and Clarissa found herself taking more care with her appearance than usual, choosing her best day dress in a deep blue that her mother had always said brought out her eyes. Virginia noticed, of course, her sharp gaze missing nothing. "Why are you dressed so nicely for inventory work?" she asked over breakfast, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer and did not approve. "I thought I might help in the store today," Clarissa said, keeping her voice neutral. "Papa mentioned you could use an extra pair of hands on Saturdays." "Did he now?" Virginia said, glancing at Thomas, who suddenly became very interested in his coffee. "Well, I suppose you can stock shelves if you stay out of the way, but do not expect to handle any complicated transactions." "You know how you get flustered." Clarissa bit back a retort. She was actually quite good with numbers and customer service, but Virginia had convinced her father that she lacked the necessary social graces. It was easier to let Virginia believe what she wanted than to fight a battle Clarissa could not win. The morning passed slowly, with Clarissa restocking shelves and sweeping floors, while Virginia charmed the customers with her practiced elegance. Every time the bell above the door chimed, Clarissa's heart leaped, only to sink when she saw it was not Dalton. By noon, she had convinced herself he was not coming. Of course he was not coming. Why would he? He had done his good deed for the week by saving her life, and now he had returned to his own life, probably not thinking about her at all. She was in the back room, unpacking a crate of canned goods, when she heard Virginia's voice take on a particular sweetness that meant she was talking to an attractive man. Clarissa told herself not to look, not to hope, but her traitorous feet carried her to the doorway where she could peek into the main store. Dalton stood at the counter, his hat in his hands, wearing clean clothes and a slightly nervous expression. He was asking Virginia about nails, but his eyes kept darting toward the back room, clearly searching for someone. "We have several sizes," Virginia was saying, leaning forward in a way that emphasized her still impressive figure despite her 40 years. "What exactly do you need them for, Mr. Zimmerman?" "Just general repairs around the ranch," Dalton said, his attention still not fully on Virginia despite her efforts. "Is Miss Davenport here today? I wanted to check that she recovered from her accident." Virginia's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "My stepdaughter is working in the back. I'm sure she's fine. Now, about those nails. I'd like to see her, if that's all right." Dalton interrupted, his voice polite but firm. "Just for a moment." Clarissa did not wait for Virginia's response. She stepped out of the back room, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the store could hear it. "I'm here," she said, trying to sound calm. "Hello, Mr. Zimmerman." The smile that broke across Dalton's face when he saw her was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Miss Davenport, I'm glad to see you looking so well. I've been worried about you." "There was no need for worry," Clarissa said, though the knowledge that he had been thinking about her made warmth spread through her chest. "I'm perfectly recovered, thanks to you." "I'm relieved to hear it," Dalton said, and seemed to mean it. He glanced at Virginia, then back at Clarissa. "I wonder if you might have time to help me select some supplies. I'm not sure exactly what I need, and you seem like you'd know this store well." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but Clarissa appreciated it nonetheless. "Of course, I'd be happy to help." Virginia looked like she wanted to object, but there were other customers in the store requiring attention, and she could hardly refuse a customer's reasonable request. "Don't take too long," she said curtly. "There's work to be done." Clarissa led Dalton to the hardware section, very aware of his presence beside her. the way he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the lower ceiling beams. He smelled like leather and sage and honest work, so different from the mothballs and starch smell of the store. "I hope I'm not getting you in trouble," Dalton said quietly when they were out of Virginia's earshot. "Your stepmother doesn't seem pleased." "My stepmother is rarely pleased with anything I do," Clarissa said, then immediately regretted the admission. She did not want to sound like she was seeking pity. "But it's fine. We do need to sell you some supplies, though, or she'll be even less happy." "Fair enough," Dalton said, his eyes twinkling. "Though I actually do need nails. The bunkhouse door is falling off its hinges, and the boss is threatening to make me sleep in the barn if I don't fix it soon." They spent the next 20 minutes selecting various items, and Clarissa found herself relaxing into easy conversation with him. Dalton had a way of asking questions that made her feel interesting rather than interrogated, and he seemed genuinely curious about her knowledge of herbs and her work at the store. "You're wasted doing inventory in the back room," he said as she tallied up his purchases. "You've got a good head for business and a way of explaining things that make sense. You should be running this place." "That's not how my stepmother sees it," Clarissa said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "She thinks I'm better suited to staying out of sight." Dalton's expression darkened. "Then your stepmother is a fool." The blunt statement, delivered with such conviction, made Clarissa's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She could not remember the last time anyone had defended her so directly. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's truth," Dalton said. He paid for his supplies, then hesitated, clearly working up courage for something. "Miss Davenport, I know this is forward, but would you consider taking a walk with me tomorrow afternoon? There's a nice path along the river, away from where you had your accident. I'd like to spend more time talking with you, if you're willing." Clarissa's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment when he realized what a mistake he was making. But something in his earnest expression stopped her. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "I'm free after church services. Around 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock is perfect," Dalton said, his smile returning full force. "I'll meet you here?" "At the store," Clarissa agreed, already mentally cataloging Virginia's likely reaction to this development. Dalton touched his hat brim in that gesture she was beginning to recognize as his, gathered his purchases, and left with a final warm glance that made Clarissa feel like she was glowing from the inside out. She did not have long to savor the feeling. As soon as the store door closed behind Dalton, Virginia descended on her like a hawk on a mouse. "What do you think you're doing?" Virginia demanded in a harsh whisper. "Flirting with customers? Making arrangements to meet men? Have you no sense of propriety?" "He asked if I would take a walk with him," Clarissa said, lifting her chin. "That's hardly scandalous. People court in this town all the time." "Court?" Virginia's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Clarissa, do not delude yourself. Men like Dalton Zimmerman do not court women like you. He's young and handsome. He could have his pick of any pretty girl in the territory. If he's showing interest in you, it's because he's after something else, and I think you know what I mean." The words hit like physical blows, precisely targeted at Clarissa's deepest insecurities. "You don't know that," she said, but her voice wavered. "I know the world," Virginia said coldly. "I know how men think and what they want. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak and worse. When he ruins your reputation and moves on to someone more suitable, you'll be the one left dealing with the consequences." "Virginia, that's enough." Thomas had emerged from the storeroom, his face set in hard lines. "Clarissa is a grown woman, and Dalton Zimmerman has shown her nothing but respect. If he wants to take her for a walk, that's her decision to make, not yours." "You're being naive, Thomas," Virginia said. but some of the venom had left her voice in the face of her husband's unusual firmness. I'm only trying to protect her from making a fool of herself. She's not the fool in this conversation, Thomas said quietly. Now, I believe you have customers waiting. Virginia swept away with an offended rustle of skirts, leaving Clarissa standing with her father in uncomfortable silence. Papa, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Thomas interrupted. I should have done it years ago. Your mother would be ashamed of how I've let Virginia treat you. She loved you so much, Clarissa. She would have wanted you to be happy, to have a chance at love and a life of your own. Tears pricked at Clarissa's eyes. What if Virginia is right, though? What if I'm misreading his intentions? Then you'll find that out for yourself, Thomas said gently. But I saw how that young man looked at you just now, and I don't think Virginia is right at all. I think he sees what I see, what your mother always saw. A smart, capable, kind-hearted woman who deserves every good thing this world has to offer. Clarissa hugged her father tightly, grateful beyond words for his support. Whatever happened with Dalton, at least she knew her father was on her side. The rest of Saturday and all of Sunday morning passed in an agonizing blur of anticipation and anxiety. Clarissa changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple green cotton that was practical for walking but still flattering. She twisted her hair up in a simple knot, eschewing the elaborate styles Virginia favored for something that would not fall apart in the wind. Church services seemed to last forever, with Reverend Michaels droning on about patience and faith while Clarissa tried not to watch the clock on the wall behind him. Virginia sat beside her, ramrod straight, radiating disapproval. Thomas, on Clarissa's other side, patted her hand when the service finally concluded. Go on, he murmured. Don't keep the young man waiting. Clarissa walked back to the store with more nervousness than she had felt facing the creek that had nearly killed her. At least with the creek, she had not had time to worry about all the ways things could go wrong. Now she had far too much time to imagine Dalton not showing up, or arriving to tell her he had reconsidered, or worse, being obviously disappointed when he saw her in full daylight. But Dalton was already there, leaning against the porch railing, and his face lit up when he saw her approaching. He had cleaned up even more than yesterday, his hair neatly combed, wearing what was clearly his best shirt. Miss Davenport, he said, straightening. You look lovely. Thank you, Clarissa said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. You're very prompt. Didn't want you thinking I wouldn't show, Dalton said with a slight grin. Are you ready for that walk? They set off together down the dusty main street, heading toward the path that followed the river on its less dangerous stretches. Florence was quiet on Sunday afternoons, most people resting after church or visiting with family. The few people they passed nodded greetings, and Clarissa saw more than one curious glance directed their way. By tomorrow, half the town would know that Clarissa Davenport had been seen walking with the handsome cowboy from the Double Bar Ranch. Let them talk, she thought with a flash of defiance. She was tired of hiding. The path along the river was shaded by cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling in the light breeze. Dalton offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Clarissa took it, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt. Tell me about growing up in Florence, Dalton said as they walked. Have you always lived here? Since I was 5, Clarissa said. My father brought us here after he sold his farm in Missouri. My mother wanted to move somewhere warm for her health. She had weak lungs. But it didn't help? Dalton asked gently. No. She made it another 7 years, but in the end, childbirth took her, not her lungs. She and my baby brother both died. The old grief was still there, but time had softened its sharpest edges. My father took it hard. He was lost for a long time. That's why he married Virginia. He needed someone to take charge, to make decisions. He's never been good at being alone. What about you? Dalton asked. Did you need Virginia? Clarissa considered the question carefully. I needed someone to help with the house and the cooking, things my mother used to do. But Virginia and I have never understood each other. She thinks I'm hopeless, and I think she's cruel. We tolerate each other for my father's sake. She's definitely cruel if she can't see your worth, Dalton said firmly. But that tells me more about her than about you. They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Clarissa worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her. Why did you ask me to walk with you? Virginia said. She trailed off, not wanting to voice her stepmother's ugly implications. What did Virginia say? Dalton asked, his voice carefully neutral. That men like you don't court women like me. That you must want something else. Clarissa forced herself to look at him as she spoke, needing to see his reaction. Dalton stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Men like me, he repeated, anger sparking in his eyes. What does that mean? And women like you? You mean intelligent, interesting women who know about healing herbs and can manage a business and who keep going even when the people around them try to make them feel small. I meant. Clarissa struggled to find words that would not make her sound pathetic. I'm not the type of woman men usually pursue. I'm not pretty or delicate or any of the things men seem to want. You're wrong about that, Dalton said quietly. Maybe you're right that you're not delicate, thank God. Delicate women wouldn't have fought as hard as you did in that creek. Delicate women would have given up. But you're absolutely wrong about the pretty part. You have the bluest eyes I've ever seen, and when you smile, your whole face lights up. You're strong and real and honest, and that's worth more than all the fashionable beauty in the world. Clarissa felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true. Dalton took her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. I asked you to walk with me because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I pulled you out of that creek. Because you're the most interesting woman I've met since I came to this territory 3 years ago. Because I want to know everything about you. Is that clear enough? Yes, Clarissa whispered, her heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. That's clear. They resumed walking, hand in hand now, and Clarissa felt like she was floating. The conversation flowed easily after that, with Dalton telling her about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about how his father had died when he was 16 and he had worked various ranch jobs ever since, sending money back to help his mother and 3 younger sisters. That's why I'm still at the double bar, he explained. The pay is decent and Mr. Henderson is a fair boss. I've been saving up, though. Someday I want to have my own place, maybe a small ranch where I can run my own herd. Nothing fancy, just enough to make a good living. That sounds wonderful, Clarissa said, imagining it. Do you think you'll stay in this area? I like Arizona, Dalton said. The weather suits me, and there's good ranch land if you know where to look. I've had my eye on a piece of property about 10 miles from here. It's got a creek for water and good grazing. The owner's getting old and might be willing to sell in a few years. They talked about his dreams and her knowledge of herbs, about books they had read and places they hoped to see someday. The afternoon slipped away like water through fingers, and Clarissa was startled when Dalton pointed out that the sun was getting low. I should get you back before people start worrying, he said reluctantly, though I'd be happy to walk with you all night if you'd let me. I'd like that too, Clarissa admitted, but Virginia is probably already sharpening her knives. Then I'll protect you, Dalton said with a grin. He walked her all the way back to the house behind the store, standing with her on the small porch as the twilight deepened around them. Can I see you again? Maybe next Saturday? I'd like that very much, Clarissa said, and was rewarded with his brilliant smile. Then it's a date, Dalton said. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. a gesture both old-fashioned and thrilling. "Sweet dreams, Miss Davenport." "Clarissa," she said impulsively. "Please call me Clarissa." "Clarissa?" he repeated, making her name sound like something precious. "Then you should call me Dalton." "Good night, Dalton," she said, loving the feel of his name in her mouth. She watched him walk away into the gathering darkness, then went inside to face Virginia's interrogation. But for once, nothing her stepmother could say had the power to hurt her. Dalton had seen her, really seen her, and he had not turned away. That knowledge was armor against any amount of Virginia's poison. The next weeks fell into a pattern that made Clarissa happier than she had been in years. Dalton came to town every Saturday, sometimes with legitimate ranch business and sometimes with transparent excuses. They would walk together, sometimes along the river, sometimes through the desert paths outside of town where the saguaro cacti stood like sentinels and the air smelled of creosote and possibility. He brought her little gifts, nothing expensive because he did not have much money, but thoughtful things that showed he paid attention. A smooth river stone that was almost perfectly round, a hawk feather he found on the trail, a small bag of coffee beans from Tucson that he knew she loved. In return, she made him salves for the cuts and scrapes that came with ranch work, taught him which plants were safe to eat if he ever got stranded in the desert, and listened to his dreams with an attention that he told her made him feel like those dreams could actually come true. They did not talk about the future in concrete terms. Not yet, but it was there between them, unspoken but growing stronger with every shared smile and held hand. Clarissa could feel herself falling in love with him, tumbling into it as helplessly as she had tumbled into the creek. But this time the sensation was exhilarating rather than terrifying. Virginia's disapproval remained constant, but Thomas actively encouraged the relationship, inviting Dalton to Sunday dinners and asking his opinions on ranch matters with genuine interest. Dalton handled Virginia's coldness with patient courtesy that never wavered, even when she made pointed comments about unsuitability and foolishness. It was in late June, nearly 3 months after the creek incident, that everything changed. Dalton arrived at the store on a Saturday morning with barely contained excitement radiating from him. He waited impatiently while Clarissa finished helping a customer with fabric selection, then practically dragged her outside. "The property I told you about," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "Old Mr. Peterson, who owns it? He came to the ranch yesterday. He's ready to sell, and he's offering it to me first because he knows I've been interested. It's a good price, Clarissa. With what I've saved and a small loan from Mr. Henderson, I can afford it." "Dalton, that's wonderful," Clarissa said, thrilled for him even as her heart sank slightly. Once he had his own ranch to manage, he would be even busier, have less time to come to town, less time for her. "There's a house on the property," Dalton continued, still talking quickly. "It needs work, but it's solid. 3 rooms with space to add on later. And the land is good, just like I thought. I could run maybe 100 head to start, build up from there." "It sounds perfect," Clarissa said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice and mostly succeeding. Dalton took both her hands in his, suddenly serious. "I need to ask you something, and I know it's fast, but I've been thinking about this for weeks now. Months, really, if I'm honest." Clarissa's breath caught. "What is it?" "Come with me to see the property," Dalton said. "Today. I want you to see it to tell me what you think. Because I don't want to build a life there alone, Clarissa. I want to build it with you." The world seemed to stop spinning. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you," Dalton said, the words simple and direct, just like him. "I've loved you since you looked up at me from that muddy creek bank with those blue eyes full of fight and determination. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the world. I love how smart you are and how you make me want to be better. And I'm asking if you could love me too, enough to take a chance on a future together." Clarissa felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy rather than hurt. "I do love you," she said, her voice shaking. "So much it scares me sometimes. But Dalton, are you sure? Really sure? You could find someone prettier, someone who would fit better in your life." "You fit perfectly in my life," Dalton said fiercely. "You are my life, or you will be if you'll have me. I don't want anyone else, Clarissa. I want you, only you, always you." He kissed her then, right there on the main street of Florence where anyone could see. A kiss full of promise and passion and perfect certainty. Clarissa kissed him back with everything in her. Years of loneliness and doubt melting away under the heat of his devotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes? Will you come see the property?" "Yes," Clarissa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to seeing the property, yes to building a life with you, yes to everything." They told Thomas first, who hugged them both and said he had been hoping for this since the first Sunday dinner. Virginia's reaction was predictably cold, but Clarissa found she did not care anymore. Virginia's opinions had no power over her now that she knew Dalton's love was real and solid and hers to keep. The property was everything Dalton had promised and more. The house was small but sturdy, built of adobe with a wooden roof that needed some repairs. The land stretched out in rolling hills perfect for grazing, with the creek running clear and cold through the center of it. Clarissa could see it all with Dalton's eyes, see the future they could build here together. "We'll need to add a room for children eventually," Dalton said as they explored the house, his arm around her waist. "And maybe build a bigger barn. But it's a good start, don't you think?" "It's more than I ever let myself dream of," Clarissa admitted. "A home of our own, built exactly how we want it. Children running through those fields, growing old together watching sunsets from that porch." "We could get married in September," Dalton suggested, pulling her close. "That gives me time to finish the repairs on the house and for you to prepare. Unless that's too soon." "It's not too soon," Clarissa said, her heart soaring. "Though Virginia will say we're rushing." "Virginia can say whatever she wants," Dalton said firmly. "This is our life, Clarissa. Ours to live however we choose. I don't give a damn what anyone else thinks as long as you're happy." The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation and hard work. Dalton officially purchased the property and moved his few belongings into the house, spending every spare moment making repairs and improvements. Clarissa helped when she could, learning to use tools and discovering she had a knack for practical work that Virginia's insistence on femininity had never allowed her to develop. Thomas threw himself into wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, handling all the arrangements that Virginia refused to help with. He commissioned a local seamstress to make Clarissa a beautiful dress in cream-colored silk, and he arranged for the reception to be held at the town's community hall. The wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon, with seemingly half of Florence in attendance. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony, and if he had doubts about the match, he kept them to himself. Clarissa stood beside Dalton in her cream silk dress, feeling more beautiful than she ever had in her life, not because of the dress but because of the way Dalton looked at her. His vows were simple and heartfelt. "I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to see you the way you deserve to be seen. I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of your courage and strength. I promise to never let you doubt how precious you are to me." Clarissa's own vows came from her heart. "I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to be your partner in building our dreams. I promise to stand beside you through whatever challenges come. I promise to never forget that you saw me when I felt invisible, and that you chose me when I did not think I was worth choosing." When Dalton kissed her as his wife, the small church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, toward their future. The reception was lively, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Virginia attended but remained coldly distant, though Thomas more than made up for it with his obvious joy. Mr. Henderson from the Double Bar Ranch came with his family, bringing a generous gift of cattle to help start Dalton's herd. The gesture moved Dalton nearly to tears. "You're a good man and a hard worker," Henderson told him. "I hate to lose you from my crew, but I'm proud to see you making your own way. You'll do well, both of you." As the sun set, Dalton and Clarissa slipped away from the festivities, riding together on his paint horse to their new home. The house was lit by lanterns Dalton had placed earlier, giving it a warm, welcoming glow. He lifted her down from the horse and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "Carrying you over the threshold," he explained, grinning. "It's tradition." "I'm too heavy," Clarissa protested, but he shook his head. "You're perfect," he said, carrying her easily through the door and into their home. "Don't ever let me hear you say otherwise." He set her down gently in the main room, which he had cleaned and furnished with simple but sturdy pieces. A fire crackled in the hearth, driving away the evening chill. Everything was modest, but it was theirs, built on their choices and their love. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, all awkwardness burned away by their deep love for each other. Dalton treated Clarissa like she was made of precious china and wildfire all at once, and she discovered that her body, which she had been taught to be ashamed of, could be a source of intense pleasure and connection when shared with someone who truly loved her. Afterward, lying in their bed with Dalton's arms around her, Clarissa felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Dalton asked, his breath warm against her hair. "For pulling me out of the creek, for seeing me, for loving me, for all of this." "Thank you for saying yes," Dalton replied, holding her tighter. "For taking a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than money. For being brave enough to believe in us." The first year of their marriage had challenges, as all new marriages do. The ranch work was brutal, with long days of mending fences and tending cattle and dealing with the 100 small disasters that came with ranching. Money was tight, with most of their profits going back into building up the herd and improving the property. But they faced every challenge together, and that made all the difference. Clarissa proved to be a natural at ranch management, keeping meticulous records of expenses and breeding schedules. She also started a small business on the side, selling her herbal remedies to neighbors and earning a reputation as someone to call when illness struck and the doctor was too far away. Dalton was tireless, working from dawn to well past dusk, but he always made time for Clarissa, always made her feel like she was the most important part of his day. They fell into comfortable routines, working side by side during the day and falling into each other's arms at night, building not just a ranch but a partnership based on mutual respect and deepening love. In the spring of 1877, Clarissa realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Her mother had died in childbirth, and that fact haunted her as her belly swelled with new life. Dalton noticed her fear and addressed it directly one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "You're worried about what happened to your mother," he said. Not a question but a statement. "What if the same thing happens to me?" Clarissa asked, voicing the fear she had been carrying. "What if you lose me the way my father lost her?" "That's not going to happen," Dalton said firmly, though she could see the fear in his own eyes. "We're going to be careful. We're going to do everything right. I'm going to take you to Tucson to see a real doctor, and we're going to make sure you have the best care possible. I won't lose you, Clarissa. I can't." True to his word, Dalton took her to Tucson twice during her pregnancy for examinations with a doctor who assured them both that Clarissa was healthy and strong. "Your mother's situation was complicated by her weak lungs," the doctor explained. "You don't have that problem. Your body is built for this, and I see no reason to expect complications." The words eased some of Clarissa's fear, though she still worried. But as the months passed and she felt the baby moving inside her, joy began to overtake terror. She was growing a whole new person, a physical manifestation of her love for Dalton. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1878, delivered with the help of a midwife from Florence and Mrs. Chun, who had become a good friend. The labor was long and difficult, but when Dalton finally heard his son's first cry, he wept with relief and joy. They named him Daniel, after Dalton's father, and Thomas after Clarissa's. Daniel Thomas Zimmerman, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, was the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. "You did it?" Dalton whispered, holding Clarissa's hand as she cradled their son. "You were so strong. I'm so proud of you." "We did it," Clarissa corrected, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Everything we've built together." Parenthood transformed them in unexpected ways. Dalton, who could be fierce and hard in dealing with ranch troubles, melted into softness when holding his son. Clarissa, who had always seen herself as inadequate, discovered a fierce protective instinct and a confidence in her mothering abilities that surprised her. Thomas visited often, delighting in his grandson, and even Virginia thawed slightly, though she could never quite bring herself to admit she had been wrong about Dalton and Clarissa's relationship. It did not matter. Clarissa no longer needed Virginia's approval or anyone else's. She had everything she needed right here. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1880, they were running 200 head of cattle and had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Clarissa was pregnant again, this time with less fear and more excitement, and Daniel was a rambunctious 2-year-old who followed his father everywhere. Their daughter, Catherine Mary, was born in the fall of 1880, a tiny thing with Clarissa's blonde hair and Dalton's determination. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, and the house filled with the chaos and joy of a growing family. Life was not perfect. There were droughts that tested their resources and winters that were harder than expected. There were times when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. But through it all, they had each other, and that made every challenge bearable. One evening in the summer of 1882, Clarissa stood on their porch watching the sunset, the same view that had captivated her the first time Dalton brought her here 7 years ago. So much had changed since that day when she nearly drowned in the creek. She had been lost then, drowning in more ways than just the water, suffocating under the weight of her stepmother's cruelty and her own low self-worth. But Dalton had pulled her out, not just from the creek, but from the prison of her own doubts. He had seen her value when she could not see it herself, had loved her loudly enough that she had finally learned to love herself. Arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and she leaned back into Dalton's familiar warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "About that day in the creek," Clarissa said. "About how different my life might have been if you hadn't been riding past at exactly that moment." "Fate," Dalton said simply. "Or luck, or divine intervention, or whatever you want to call it. I'm just grateful I was there." "I'm grateful too," Clarissa said, turning in his arms to face him. "For all of it. For you pulling me out, for you seeing me, for you loving me, for this life we've built, for our children, for everything." "It's not just what I gave you," Dalton said seriously, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "It's what you gave me. You made me believe I could be more than just another ranch hand working someone else's land. You made me want to build something lasting. You made me a better man, Clarissa." From inside the house came the sound of Daniel calling for his father and Catherine's baby laughter. Their life together, loud and messy and absolutely perfect. "We should go in," Clarissa said, though neither of them moved. "In a minute," Dalton said, and kissed her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding day, in the creek that almost claimed her life, on every ordinary day in between. "I just want to hold you here for one more minute and remember how lucky I am." "We're both lucky," Clarissa said when they finally broke apart. "We found each other." They walked back into their home together, hand in hand, toward the life they continued to build with every passing day. Behind them, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. Nature's celebration of another day survived and savored. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. In 1884, their third child was born, another son they named William after Dalton's grandfather. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to add the extra rooms to the house that Dalton had promised when he first showed her the property. Clarissa's herb business grew beyond her expectations, with people traveling from as far as Tucson to purchase her remedies. She trained several other women in the area, sharing her knowledge freely and building a network of healers who could help their community. The income from this work gave her a sense of independence and accomplishment that she treasured. Thomas remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting every week and doting on his grandchildren with an enthusiasm that made up for Virginia's continued coldness. In 1885, Virginia left Thomas, announcing that she was moving back east to live with her sister. The divorce was quiet and somewhat scandalous, but Thomas seemed lighter afterward, freed from a marriage that had never truly been happy. He sold the general store in 1886 and moved into a small house on their property, where he helped with the children and the ranch work. Clarissa loved having her father close, loved watching him finally relax into contentment after so many years of quiet unhappiness. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Catherine was wild and fearless, constantly climbing things she should not and declaring she was going to be a horse wrangler when she grew up. William was gentle and curious, fascinated by his mother's herbs and always asking questions about how things worked. In 1888, when Clarissa was 35 and Dalton was 37, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a daughter named Rose Elizabeth. She arrived unexpectedly, 10 years after William, and her birth felt like a gift, a sweet epilogue to their growing family. Watching Dalton cradle their newest daughter with the same tenderness he had shown to all their children, Clarissa felt her heart overflow with gratitude. They had built something remarkable here, something that went far beyond the physical ranch. They had built a family rooted in love and respect, a home where everyone was valued and seen. The children grew and the ranch grew with them. Daniel worked alongside his father from a young age, learning everything about ranching and showing a natural aptitude for it. Catherine did indeed become an excellent horse handler, with a gift for training even the most difficult animals. William spent hours with Clarissa in her herb garden, absorbing knowledge and showing early signs of wanting to become a doctor. Rose was still young, but she showed signs of being a perfect blend of all her siblings, with Daniel's seriousness, Catherine's daring, and William's curiosity. In 1895, when Clarissa was 42, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Mr. Henderson, now elderly and retired, attended the party along with seemingly everyone in Florence and the surrounding ranches. The celebration took place at their ranch, under a tent set up near the house, with music and dancing and stories shared about the couple who had beaten the odds. 20 years, Dalton said in a brief speech, his arm around Clarissa's waist. 20 years since I married the woman I pulled from a creek, the woman who saved me as surely as I saved her. People said we were rushing into things, said it wouldn't last, said we were too different. But here we are, with 4 beautiful children, a successful ranch, and more love than I ever thought possible. To my wife, who is still the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I know. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses, and Clarissa felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. She looked around at all the faces, at the life they had built together, and felt complete. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Clarissa and Dalton took a walk by the creek that ran through their property. It was peaceful here, the water burbling gently over rocks, nothing like the dangerous torrent that had almost killed her 20 years ago. "Do you ever think about that day?" Clarissa asked, holding Dalton's hand as they walked. "About how easily it could have all been different?" "Sometimes," Dalton admitted. "I think about how if I had taken a different route that day, or left the ranch 10 minutes later, I might have missed you. The whole course of my life would have been different." "Mine too," Clarissa said. "I might have died in that creek, or survived and gone back to my life in the store, gradually turning into a bitter old woman like Virginia. I never would have known what I was missing." "We were meant to find each other," Dalton said with certainty. "I believe that. Call it fate or God's plan or just incredible luck. But we were meant to be together." They stood by the creek for a long time, watching the moonlight dance on the water, remembering and grateful. After 2 decades together, their love had only deepened and strengthened. The passion of their early days had matured into something even more profound, a partnership and friendship that sustained them through everything. The years continued their steady march forward. Daniel married in 1898 at age 21, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Alice who fit seamlessly into the family. They built their own house on the ranch property, and soon Clarissa and Dalton were grandparents, delighting in Daniel and Alice's son. Another Daniel they called Danny to avoid confusion. Catherine announced in 1900 that she had no intention of marrying, that she was perfectly happy running the horse training operation she had started on a portion of the ranch. Clarissa supported her daughter's choice, proud of her independence and determination to live life on her own terms. William went off to medical school in California in 1902, fulfilling the dream he had held since childhood. He wrote long letters home describing his studies and promising to return to Arizona to practice once he completed his training. Clarissa saved every letter, proud beyond measure of her gentle son who wanted to heal people. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's kind heart and her father's practical nature. She married in 1906 to a rancher's son from a neighboring property, and the joy on her face as she walked down the aisle brought back memories of Clarissa's own wedding day. Thomas lived to the remarkable age of 82, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1908. His death was sad but not tragic, a natural ending to a life well lived. At his funeral, Clarissa spoke about how he had always supported her, how he had given her the courage to reach for happiness when she thought it was beyond her grasp. By 1910, Clarissa was 57 and Dalton was 59. They had slowed down somewhat, hiring more help to manage the day-to-day ranch operations while Daniel took over more of the leadership. But they were both healthy and active, still walking by their creek in the evenings, still finding joy in each other's company. One evening in the summer of 1910, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage. The view had not changed much in 34 years, but everything else had. The small house had grown into a substantial ranch home. The modest herd had multiplied many times over. The two of them had become 4, then 7 counting grandchildren, with more on the way. "Do you have any regrets?" Clarissa asked Dalton, a question she had never voiced before. Dalton thought for a long moment before answering. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me here, to you, to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I worried at first," Clarissa admitted, "that you would wake up one day and realize you had settled, that you could have done better than me." "Clarissa," Dalton said, taking her hand and looking at her seriously. "In 34 years of marriage, have I ever given you reason to doubt how much I love you? how much I value you. No, Clarissa said honestly. Never. Then trust me when I say this one more time. You were never second best. You were never a compromise. You were and are the love of my life, my partner, my best friend. You're the reason I wake up grateful every morning. Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. Clarissa leaned over and kissed him. This man who had saved her life and then helped her build one worth living. I love you, she said simply. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Dalton replied. Always have, always will. The years rolled on, gentle and full. William returned from California in 1912 with a medical degree and opened a practice in Florence, finally giving the town its own resident doctor. He visited the ranch often, checking on his parents' health and playing with his growing collection of nieces and nephews. Catherine's horse operation became one of the most respected in the territory, and she was happy and fulfilled in her independence. She took in a young orphan girl in 1914, unofficially adopting her and raising her with all the love she had to give, creating a family on her own terms. Rose gave Clarissa and Dalton 3 more grandchildren, and the ranch house was often filled with the sound of children's laughter. Daniel and Alice added 2 more children to their family as well, and Sunday dinners became large, chaotic affairs that Clarissa orchestrated with practiced ease. In 1916, Clarissa was 63 and Dalton was 65. They had been married for 38 years, together through everything life could throw at them. The ranch was prosperous and secure. Their children were healthy and happy, and their grandchildren were growing up surrounded by love. One day in early spring, Dalton was out checking fences when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He made it back to the house, but it was clear something was seriously wrong. William was summoned immediately, and he examined his father with professional calm masking deep worry. Your heart, William said gently after the examination. It's been working hard for 65 years, Papa. You need to slow down. Take it easier. I'll rest, Dalton promised, squeezing Clarissa's hand. But they both knew what this meant, the reminder that they were not young anymore, that their time together, however long and beautiful it had been, was finite. Dalton followed William's orders, cutting back on physical labor and letting Daniel handle more of the ranch work. But he never complained, never acted like he was being cheated. He and Clarissa spent their days together, talking and reading and watching their grandchildren play, savoring every moment. No regrets, Dalton would say often, and Clarissa understood. They had lived a full life together, rich with love and accomplishment. Whatever time they had left was bonus, a gift to be treasured. Dalton lived for another 3 years, years filled with quiet joy and family. He passed away peacefully in 1919, in his sleep, with Clarissa beside him as she had been for 41 years of marriage. His last words to her, spoken that final evening, were thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Clarissa mourned deeply but not bitterly. How could she be bitter about losing a man who had given her everything, who had loved her without reservation for 4 decades? She missed him terribly, but she also felt grateful beyond measure for every day they had shared. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Daniel ran the operation with the same skill and dedication his father had shown, and the ranch continued to thrive. Clarissa spent her time with her herbs, with her grandchildren, and with her memories. On quiet evenings, she would walk down to the creek that ran through their property, the same creek where her life had changed forever one spring day in 1876. She would stand there, remembering the feeling of drowning, of strong hands pulling her to safety, of a voice saying, "Breathe, you're safe now." Dalton had saved her that day, in more ways than one. He had pulled her from the water, but he had also pulled her from a life of quiet desperation. He had shown her that she was worthy of love, that she was strong and capable and valuable. He had given her a family, a home, and a lifetime of devotion. Clarissa lived to the age of 87, passing away peacefully in 1933, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She had lived to see the ranch grow into one of the most successful in the region, to see all her children happy and settled, to hold great-grandchildren in her arms. Her last coherent words were about Dalton. "I can see him," she told Catherine, who was holding her hand. "He's waiting for me by the creek, just like he was that first day. He's smiling and holding out his hand. I'm not afraid." And she wasn't. Death held no terror for a woman who had lived so fully and loved so completely. As she closed her eyes for the last time, Clarissa felt nothing but peace and gratitude for the extraordinary life that had begun the day a cowboy pulled her from a creek and told her to breathe, that she was safe now. The ranch remained in the family for generations, a testament to what Clarissa and Dalton had built together. Their descendants told the story of how it all began, of the drowning woman and the cowboy who saved her, of the love that grew from that terrifying moment into something beautiful and lasting. It became a family legend, passed down through the decades. The story of Clarissa and Dalton, who found each other at exactly the right moment, who built a life and a love that endured through everything. The story of a fat girl who thought she was unworthy of love, and a cowboy who saw her true value and refused to let her doubt it. The story of two people who proved that real love isn't about appearances or society's expectations. It's about seeing someone truly, loving them completely, and building something together that's stronger than any obstacle. It's about pulling each other to safety, not just once but every day, in all the small and large ways that matter. And it all started with rushing water, desperate struggle, strong hands, and for simple words that changed everything. Breathe, you're safe now.